They say the worst betrayals happen in public. Mine happened in front of 300 witnesses when my husband's lover ripped my dress apart at a charity gala while I was 7 months pregnant. But she made one fatal mistake. She humiliated me in front of three billionaire brothers who don't forgive and don't lose. What started as my worst nightmare became their declaration of war. This is the true story of how a torn dress, a hidden conspiracy, and 42 poisoned babies brought down a pharmaceutical empire. If you want to see justice actually served, smash that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe because the final twist will blow your mind. Let's begin. They say humiliation is a spectator sport. They're right. I'm Grace Morrison. And 72 hours ago, I was a senior attorney at Boston's most prestigious law firm, Morrison & Webb. I specialized in whistleblower cases, protecting people who spoke truth to power, corporate executives hiding environmental disasters, pharmaceutical companies burying drug trial failures, financial institutions cooking their books. I thought I understood betrayal. I thought I'd seen the worst of human nature laid bare in depositions and courtrooms, watched men in expensive suits lie under oath without flinching, seen women destroyed by systems designed to protect the powerful. I was wrong about everything. The worst betrayal doesn't happen in a courtroom or a deposition. It happens when cameras are flashing like lightning, when your pregnant belly is exposed under ballroom lights, when silk tears and blood starts to show, and when the man you married looks at you like you're something scraped off his Italian leather shoe. When people you respected, people you worked with, people you thought were friends, turn their backs and whisper behind manicured hands. When your entire world collapses in front of witnesses who treat your pain like entertainment. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and tell you how a woman who made her career protecting whistleblowers became one herself. How the hunter became the hunted. 3 days before my life exploded into a million irreparable pieces. I was 7 months pregnant and exhausted in that bone-deep way that comes from growing another human while working 60-hour weeks. My feet were swollen enough that I couldn't wear anything but house slippers around our Beacon Hill townhouse. My back ached constantly, a dull throb that never quite went away. My wedding ring barely fit anymore, cutting into my finger, and I'd been pulling those brutal hours preparing for a major pharmaceutical fraud case. Ironically enough, documents spread across my home office, evidence of corner cutting and safety violations that I planned to use to take down another corrupt executive. I should have been paying attention to my own life instead of other people's cases. My husband, Blake Sutherland, CEO of Sutherland Pharma, kept telling me to slow down, to rest, to think about the baby's health instead of my career. "You're pushing too hard, Grace," he'd say, barely glancing up from his phone, his thumb constantly scrolling through messages that made his expression shift in ways I couldn't read anymore. "The baby needs you to rest. Your blood pressure is already elevated." I should have noticed his phone never stopped buzzing with notifications. Morning, Trish, noon, night, weekends. It was always lighting up with messages he'd quickly dismiss or angle away from my view. I should have asked why he was working late 4 nights a week, coming home at midnight smelling like expensive perfume that wasn't mine, his collar slightly rumpled. I should have questioned the jewelry store receipt I found crumpled in his car's console for a diamond necklace that cost more than my monthly salary, a necklace I never received or even heard mentioned. I should have wondered why our credit card statements showed charges at luxury hotels in Boston's Back Bay, when he was supposedly working late at the office, 15 minutes from our home. But here's something nobody tells you about being pregnant and working in a demanding career. Something they don't mention in the pregnancy books or prenatal classes. You're so tired, so overwhelmed by the physical and mental demands of growing a human and maintaining your professional reputation, that you ignore the red flags waving right in front of your face. You tell yourself it's pregnancy paranoia, hormones making you irrational and suspicious. You convince yourself everything's fine because the alternative, that your husband is cheating and planning to leave you while you're carrying his child, is too terrifying to consider seriously. It's easier to believe you're imagining things, that you're being paranoid, than to face the truth that would destroy your entire world. My obstetrician, Dr. Owen Bradshaw, asked me during my last appointment 2 weeks ago, his expression concerned as he reviewed my chart. "Grace, is everything okay at home? Your cortisol levels are unusually high for this stage of pregnancy. Chronic stress can cause serious complications for both you and the baby." "Just work stress," we'd said automatically. The lie coming easily because I'd been telling it to myself for weeks, maybe months. He'd paused, his pen hovering over my chart, his expression troubled in a way that should have alarmed me. Stress or something else, because if there's something going on at home, if you feel unsafe or unsupported in any way, that directly affects your health and the baby's development. You can tell me anything. I changed the subject quickly, asking about kick counts and nursery preparation. Anything to avoid the question I didn't want to answer because answering meant acknowledging the truth. The day of the gala, I woke up at 5 in the morning with a feeling of dread so strong it made me nauseous beyond normal pregnancy nausea. Call it instinct. Call it mother's intuition. Call it paranoia. But my hands shook as I got dressed in our master bathroom. Blake had insisted we attend Sutherland Pharmaceuticals' annual charity gala at the Boston Harbor Hotel. The board wanted to see us united, he said. His promotion to CEO depended on presenting the right image to investors and stakeholders. I needed to smile, look beautiful despite being heavily pregnant, and play the role of supportive wife perfectly. I'd designed my own dress for the occasion, spending weeks on it, midnight blue silk that flowed over my pregnant belly in elegant drapes. I'd spent weeks sketching different designs, choosing the perfect fabric, working with a talented seamstress. I wanted to feel beautiful, powerful, in control of at least one aspect of this night. Instead, standing in front of the full-length mirror that evening, adjusting the dress for the 100th time, I felt like I was putting on armor for a battle I didn't understand, preparing for war without knowing who the enemy was. Blake rushed me out the door before I could overthink it, before I could follow the instinct screaming at me to stay home, to fake illness, to avoid whatever was coming. In the car, his phone lit up with a text. I caught a glimpse before he swiped it away with practiced quickness, his movements quick and guilty. Wear the red dress I bought you. -S. My throat tightened, words catching before they could form. Blake, who's S? What? He didn't look at me, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, jaw tight with tension. The text, I saw it clearly. Who's S? Sloan, my PR director. She's coordinating tonight's event details. His voice was flat, dismissive, rehearsed like he'd practiced this exact answer. You're being paranoid again. It's just pregnancy hormones making you emotional and suspicious about nothing. There it was again. Pregnancy hormones. The perfect excuse to gaslight a woman into doubting her own eyes, her own instincts, her own reality and sanity. My best friend and paralegal, May Winters, had called that morning, her voice frantic and scared in a way I'd never heard before. Grace, I found something in the firm's mailroom, an envelope addressed to you that someone tried to hide behind other packages. You need to see this before tonight. Please don't go to that gala. Something's wrong. But I was already in the car, already heading toward the Boston Harbor Hotel, already walking straight into the carefully constructed trap they'd laid so carefully over months. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers that threw rainbow light across marble floors polished to mirror shine. Old money circulated with champagne glasses, their laughter echoing off walls decorated with enough flowers to bankrupt a small business. Boston's pharmaceutical elite, senators who'd taken campaign donations, investors who'd made fortunes on human suffering, celebrities who lent their faces to causes. I recognized faces from magazine covers, people who moved markets with a phone call, who'd crushed competitors without losing sleep, who controlled more money than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. Blake disappeared immediately, leaving me standing alone near the entrance like an unwanted accessory he'd rather not acknowledge. That's when I saw her, Sloan Pierce, 28, blonde hair in a perfect updo that probably cost $500, wearing a red dress that hugged every curve and probably cost more than my car payment. Slim, elegant, confident in the way only women who've never struggled can be. And around her neck, catching the light, was the necklace from the receipt. The one Blake had bought but I'd never received. The diamond pendant that represented everything wrong with my marriage. Every lie, every betrayal. She saw me looking and smiled. Not a friendly smile, not even a polite social smile. A predator's smile. The smile of someone who'd already won and wanted me to know it. The gala hummed with controlled chaos and carefully orchestrated networking. The kind of event where fortunes changed hands over cocktails. Waiters in crisp black uniforms glided between clusters of power brokers, offering champagne and crystal flutes and hors d'oeuvres that cost more per bite than most people's entire meals. A string quartet played something classical and forgettable, the kind of music rich people use as background noise for their deal-making. I stood at the edge of it all, one hand protectively on my belly, where my daughter kicked restlessly, as if sensing my anxiety, watching my husband work the room like I didn't exist, like I was invisible or already erased from his life. Sloane Pierce moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she belonged and who didn't. She touched arms, whispered in ears, made people lean in close to catch her words. A PR director, Blake had said dismissively. But PR directors don't wear $20,000 necklaces to company events. They don't rest their hands possessively on the CEO's arm like they own him. They don't look at his pregnant wife with that particular mixture of triumph and contempt, like watching a rival fall. I needed answers desperately. My lawyer brain kicked in, the part of me that built airtight cases from fragments of contradictory evidence. I made my way toward Blake through the crowd, but investors kept intercepting me with strange comments that made my stomach churn with dread. "Congratulations on the new arrangement," one silver-haired man in a Rolex worth more than my yearly salary said, raising his glass in a toast I didn't understand. "Excuse me," I said, confused and alarmed. "What arrangement?" He'd already moved on, disappearing into the crowd before I could ask what he meant, leaving me more confused and worried. A woman in diamonds that could fund a college education air-kissed near my cheek, her perfume overwhelming and expensive. "Bold of Blake to bring both of you tonight. Very modern and progressive. I suppose that's how young people handle these situations now. Both of us." My pulse quickened, blood rushing in my ears, loud enough to drown out the string quartet. What arrangement? What situation? What did these people know that I didn't? I finally reached Blake near the bar, where he stood laughing at something an investor said, his head thrown back in that fake laugh he used at networking events. Sloane was beside him, her hand resting possessively on his arm, like she had every right to touch him, to claim him publicly. They looked like a couple in a way that made my stomach drop sickeningly. They looked right together, matched in their expensive clothes and easy confidence, like they belonged side by side while I was the outsider disrupting their perfect picture. "Blake," I said, my voice sharper than intended, cutting through the polite conversation and forced laughter. "We need to talk. Right now. Privately." He glanced at me, annoyance flashing across his face at the interruption, at my presence disrupting his carefully managed image. "Grace, not now. I'm with the board members. This is important business." "This is important too," I insisted, my attorney voice emerging, the one I used in depositions when witnesses tried to evade. "We need to talk privately about what's happening here." Sloane tilted her head, her smile widening with cruel amusement, like watching a mouse realize it's trapped. "Oh, Grace, I'm surprised you came tonight. Blake said you were too uncomfortable for public events in your condition, too emotional and unstable." She emphasized uncomfortable like it was a polite word for something disgusting, something to be ashamed of. "Blake says a lot of things," I replied, holding her gaze, refusing to look away first or show weakness. "Like how you're just his PR director, like how your relationship is purely professional and appropriate. Is that what he told you?" She laughed, light and cruel, the sound carrying across the suddenly quiet space around us as people sensed drama brewing. "How sweet, how incredibly naive." Blake's jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his cheek. "Sloane, give us a minute, please." "Why?" She turned to face me fully, and I saw it then clearly. The victory in her eyes, the carefully planned reveal, the moment she'd been anticipating. She deserves to know the truth. They all do. She gestured to the gathering crowd, people sensing blood in the water the way sharks do, gravitating closer with phones already raised to record whatever happened next. "Know what?" I demanded, but I already felt it coming, like a wave about to crash. The trap closing with mechanical precision, the hammer falling exactly as planned. Sloane's voice rose, projecting to the growing audience like an actress hitting her mark perfectly. "Blake and I are engaged. We're getting married next spring. He filed for divorce from you 3 weeks ago. You just haven't been served yet because your law firm's mail clerk was very accommodating for the right price. Money talks. Grace, you should know that. The words hit like a physical blow, knocking the air completely from my lungs. The ballroom tilted sideways sickeningly. Faces blurred into a mass of judgment and fascination. That's impossible. I never received any papers. That's illegal. You can't hide legal documents. Your attorney of record received them properly, Blake said, his voice cold and clinical, devoid of any emotion or humanity. The man I'd married, the man who'd proposed in a half-finished penthouse 5 years ago, was gone completely, replaced by this stranger who looked at me with calculation instead of love, with contempt instead of care. Check with Morrison and Webb if you don't believe of me. It's all perfectly legal and documented. My lawyers made sure of that. You bribed someone at my own firm. My voice cracked with disbelief and hurt. You hid divorce papers from me. You made me think we were fine while planning this. I did what was necessary for the company, he said simply, like he was discussing a business transaction or quarterly earnings. The board needs stability. They need to see strong, decisive leadership. A wife who's falling apart, who's paranoid and emotional and unstable, who can't handle the pressures of her position. That's not the image this company needs right now as we prepare for our IPO. Falling apart. Tears burned my eyes. Fury and humiliation warring in my chest, making it hard to breathe. You did this. You created this situation deliberately. You lied to me for months while planning to destroy me. You let me think we were building a life together, planning for our daughter, while you were already planning its demolition. Don't be so dramatic, he said, and the dismissiveness in his tone, the casual cruelty and complete lack of empathy, broke something fundamental and irreparable in me. You'll be taken care of financially. My lawyers have drawn up a very generous settlement. You'll receive monthly support for the child. You won't want for anything material. You should be grateful. Material, I repeated, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. You think this is about money, about financial support? Sloane stepped closer, invading my personal space, her perfume expensive and cloying and suffocating. The baby complicates things. Obviously, we would have preferred if you weren't pregnant, but Blake's lawyers have addressed custody arrangements already. You'll have visitation rights. Of course. We're not monsters. You'll see her every other weekend. Every other weekend. With my own daughter. The casualness with which she discussed taking my child made my vision blur with rage. The crowd pressed closer, sensing the climax approaching. Phones held high like weapons. Camera flashes creating spots in my vision, blinding and disorienting. This was planned meticulously. Every word, every moment, orchestrated for maximum impact and humiliation. They'd rehearsed this, practiced the reveal, chosen the exact setting and timing for destroying me. I had to get out immediately. The walls were closing in, whispers growing louder and more vicious, judgment pressing down like physical weight crushing me. I turned toward the exit, desperate for air, for escape, for anywhere but this ballroom full of witnesses to my complete humiliation. That's when Sloane made her final move, the one they'd planned to destroy me completely and permanently. I made it 3 steps toward the exit, desperate for air and escape. My hands shook as I clutched my evening bag. The faces around me blurred into judgment and fascination, watching my pain like entertainment. Then Sloane's voice cut through the noise, sweet and poisonous. Wait, Grace, please wait. I should have kept walking. Every instinct screamed to escape, but years of professional conditioning made me pause, made me turn back. She approached with that predator smile, heels clicking deliberately. Her hand reached out. Let me at least wish you well. No hard feelings, after all. We both want what's best for Blake. She extended her hand for a handshake. Years of training made me reach back automatically. Refusing would seem petty, irrational. Our hands met. I felt the cool metal of her bracelet, sharp geometric edges. Then she pulled, hard and deliberate, her bracelet catching on my dress on strap. The sound of tearing silk echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom like a gunshot. My dress ripped from shoulder to waist. the fabric splitting apart. The force pulled me forward, exposing my pregnant belly and the compression garment underneath. Everything I'd hidden, suddenly on display for hundreds of cameras. The flashes came like lightning. Phones pointed from every direction. I tried to cover myself, but there was too much exposed. My body, my pregnancy, my shame, all captured in high definition. "Oops," Sloane said, not hiding her satisfaction. "How clumsy of me. These bracelets catch on everything." The room spun violently. Then came the pain, sharp and wrong, stabbing through my abdomen. I looked down and saw blood seeping through the white garment, a growing red stain that made people gasp and step back. "Help," I whispered, but my voice was lost in the chaos. Gasps, whispers, nervous laughter. Someone said scandal. Someone else said pathetic. A woman called me a gold digger who got what she deserved. I looked desperately for Blake. He was backing away, protecting his image, putting distance between himself and this disaster. His face showed pure calculation. His eyes darted to cameras, to board members, already planning how to spin this. The pain intensified. My knees buckled. I was falling when strong hands caught me. "I've got you. You're safe now." The voice was male, unfamiliar, urgent. Someone was removing their jacket, wrapping it around my shoulders, covering me. Someone was blocking the cameras with their body. "Someone call 911 immediately. This woman needs emergency medical care. Now." The command had weight. People listened. I looked up at my rescuer through a haze of pain. Mid-30s, dark hair, sharp eyes holding fury on my behalf. He positioned himself between me and the crowd. "My name's Nash Foster," he said gently. "I'm an investigative journalist. I was covering this event. I saw what happened. That wasn't an accident. That was deliberate assault, and I recorded everything. The baby." I managed through the pain. "Something's wrong with the baby. Ambulance is 2 minutes out, he assured me. "Stay with me. Grace? What's your full name?" "Grace Morrison. Attorney at Morrison and Webb?" "Grace, listen carefully. You're going to be fine, and so is your baby. But I need you to remember everything that just happened. Every word, every action, because what they did to you isn't just cruel, it's criminal assault. And I'm going to help you prove it." Blake tried to approach. Nash physically stepped in front of him. "Stay back," Nash said, deadly calm. "That's my wife," Blake protested weakly. "Your wife," Nash's laugh was bitter. "You just announced your divorce and engagement to another woman. You stood by while your mistress assaulted her. You don't get to call her that anymore." Paramedics rushed in. As they loaded me onto a stretcher, I heard Nash on his phone. "Declan, it's Nash. I need you at Boston Harbor Hotel. Now, bring every lawyer we have. This is going to be massive." Through the pain and fear, I caught fragments of conversation. "Who's he calling?" "That's Nash Foster, the investigative journalist who took down Senator Brennan. His brother Declan owns half of Boston. The Foster family, Sutherland, just made a powerful enemy." As they wheeled me out, I saw Sloane whispering urgently to Blake. They looked worried now. Good. But I didn't know yet how much worse this would get. I didn't know the public humiliation was just the opening move. I didn't understand that Blake and Sloane had spent months building a trap so complete that even my rescue might not be enough. The ambulance doors slammed shut. In that brief quiet before the sirens started, I felt my daughter move inside me. A strong kick, defiant and alive. "Hold on, baby girl," I whispered, my hand on my belly. "We're going to survive this. We're going to fight back. I promise you that." The ambulance ride blurred into a nightmare of sirens wailing through Boston's streets, paramedics talking in urgent medical shorthand, and pain that came in waves I couldn't control. They kept asking me questions I could barely process through the fog. When was my last contraction? Was I experiencing dizziness? Did I have a history of complications I answered on autopilot? My attorney brain still functioning even as my body felt like it was shutting down. At Boston Memorial Hospital, they rushed me through automatic doors into the emergency room, a space I'd been to before on cases but never as the patient, never this vulnerable. Machines beeped insistently. Voices shouted medical terms I vaguely recognized from malpractice cases. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency, hooking me up to monitors, starting IVs, checking the baby's heartbeat with a fetal monitor that made a rapid whooshing sound. The only thing that mattered, the only question I could focus on through the pain, was the one nobody would answer directly. Is my baby okay? Please, somebody just tell me. A nurse with kind eyes and graying hair squeezed my hand gently. We're checking now, honey. The doctor's coming. Just try to stay calm. Calm. Right. My dress had been torn off in front of hundreds of people. My husband had publicly divorced me while 7 months pregnant. I was bleeding and in pain. But sure, stay calm. Nash Foster stayed with me despite having no obligation, a stranger who had no reason to help. While doctors examined me behind a curtain, he stood just outside, on his phone, making things happen with authority that suggested he was used to moving pieces on larger boards. I don't care if he's in the meeting with the mayor, Nash said into his phone, firm but controlled. Tell Declan it's a family emergency. Tell him the woman involved. Her mother was Claire Morrison. He'll understand exactly what that means. Through the haze of fear and medication, I heard him explaining the situation to someone, his voice controlled, but with an edge of personal anger underneath. The emergency room doctor finally came in, pulling back the curtain, middle-aged with kind eyes and deep lines that suggested years in emergency medicine. My heart stopped. Miss Morrison, he said gently, sitting on a rolling stool at eye level. I'm Dr. Andrew Bennett. You have what we call a partial placental abruption. The placenta, which provides oxygen and nutrients to your baby, has started to separate from your uterine wall. It's a serious condition. The medical terminology clicked into place. I'd handled a malpractice case involving placental abruption 3 years ago. The baby hadn't survived. My vision started to narrow. Will my baby die? I asked directly, needing truth without sugarcoating. Just tell me. Dr. Bennett met my eyes. Your baby's heartbeat is currently stable and strong, which is very good. But this is serious. You need complete bed rest for the remainder of your pregnancy. No stress whatsoever. No physical activity beyond necessities. If the abruption progresses, we may need to deliver early via emergency cesarean. You're 30 weeks along. A baby born at 30 weeks has excellent survival chances with NICU care. But we want to avoid that if possible. Every day the baby stays in makes a significant difference. Stress? No stress. I almost laughed. The sound coming out like a strangled sob. My husband had just publicly humiliated me. His lover had assaulted me. But sure, no stress. The curtain pushed aside with purpose. 2 men entered, both carrying the same quiet authority as Nash. Brothers, clearly. Same bone structure, but different expressions. The older one, maybe late 40s, wore a suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary. His presence filled the space. Ms. Morrison, I'm Declan Foster. This is my youngest brother, Reed. Reed looked younger, late 20s, dressed casually but expensively. He held a tablet with focused energy. Nash called us, Declan continued, his voice measured and commanding. We've already spoken to hospital administration. You're being moved to a private room with security. Your medical bills are covered by the Foster Foundation. I shook my head weakly, my attorney brain kicking in. I can't accept charity from strangers. I don't even know you. It's not charity, Declan said simply, pulling up a chair. My mother was 7 months pregnant when my father left her for his secretary. Nobody helped. She nearly lost my youngest brother because of stress and lack of resources. She developed preeclampsia, had to deliver at 32 weeks. Reed spent 2 months in the NICU. I won't let that happen to another woman, if I can prevent it. Nash moved closer to the bed, his expression serious. Grace, I need to tell you something. I wasn't at that gala by accident. I've been investigating Sutherland Pharma for the past 6 months. There's something wrong with their prenatal vitamin line. I've been trying to find evidence, build a case. What happened to you tonight wasn't random cruelty. It was calculated to destroy your credibility before you could become a problem for them. What do you mean? My mind struggled to catch up. Why would I be a problem? Reed looked up from his tablet, fingers moving constantly. I pulled the security footage from the hotel within 10 minutes. Sloan Pierce's assault on you was deliberate. She positioned herself perfectly, timed it for maximum camera exposure. This was planned, possibly for weeks. But why? Why would anyone plan something so elaborate just to hurt me? The three brothers exchanged meaningful glances, having a silent conversation I couldn't interpret. Nash pulled up a chair, sitting so he could look at me directly. That's what we need to figure out. But Grace, I need to ask you something. Your husband's company, Sutherland Pharma. Have you noticed anything unusual? Any concerns about their products? I thought about the prenatal vitamins Blake had insisted I take. I've been taking their prenatal supplements since my second trimester. Blake brought them home. Insisted they were better than what my doctor prescribed. Nash's expression darkened immediately. Did your doctor specifically prescribe those Sutherland vitamins? No, Blake just brought them home one day. Said they were top of the line. That as the CEO's wife, I should take his company's products. Made it seem like a pride thing. Another significant look passed between the brothers. Weighted with meaning. Reed's fingers flew across his tablet with increased urgency. I'm running a comprehensive background check on your husband's company finances right now. Give me 20 minutes. Grace, Declan said carefully, his lawyer voice emerging. We're going to help you through this situation, but we need your explicit permission to investigate your husband's company deeply. This might get very complicated, very public, very messy. Are you prepared for that? He filed for divorce, I said, my voice hollow with reality finally sinking in completely. He's not my husband anymore. He made that clear in front of everyone who matters in Boston. So yes, investigate whatever you need. Actually, a new voice interrupted coldly from the doorway, making my blood freeze. Legally, he is still your husband, and I have a court order that says Ms. Morrison poses an imminent danger to her unborn child and requires immediate psychiatric evaluation. A man in an expensive suit entered, flanked by two uncomfortable-looking police officers. He held legal documents with official seals. Behind him, looking falsely concerned and triumphant, was Blake. My blood ran cold as an understanding crashed over me. The trap had multiple layers, carefully constructed over months, and I'd only just fallen through the first one. The man with the court order was Richard Vaughn, one of Boston's most expensive and ruthless corporate defense attorneys, someone I vaguely recognized from high-profile cases and society page photographs at charity events. His smile was professionally cold, his eyes calculating every advantage with practiced precision. Behind him, Blake wore an expression of perfect concern and worry. The devoted husband act so convincing, I almost believed it myself despite knowing better. I'm Richard Vaughn, representing Blake Sutherland, he announced formally, his voice carrying the weight of authority and legal power. We have an emergency psychiatric evaluation order for Grace Morrison, signed 1 hour ago by Judge Thomas Patterson of Suffolk County Superior Court. Nash stood immediately, his body positioning itself protectively between the attorney and my hospital bed, creating a physical barrier. On what grounds you can't just commit someone to psychiatric evaluation without significant documented evidence of danger? Vaughn handed a thick stack of papers to Declan with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd done this maneuver before, who'd weaponized psychiatric commitment for clients. Miss Morrison has exhibited increasingly erratic and dangerous behavior over the past several weeks. Mr. Sutherland has documented substantial evidence of paranoid delusions, obsessive research into methods of faking pregnancy complications, and explicit verbal threats made against him and his business interests. For the safety of the unborn child, we're seeking emergency psychiatric evaluation with possible extended commitment. That's a complete and utter lie, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. My attorney training kicking in. I never researched anything like that. I would never harm my baby. This is obvious retaliation. Anyone can see that. Your work laptop tells a different story entirely, Blake said, stepping forward with manufactured concern in his voice and expression. He'd always been good at presentations, at selling narratives to boardrooms and investors. Now he was selling my insanity to anyone who would listen. Grace, you've been under tremendous stress. The pregnancy, your demanding caseload, your increasing paranoia about my business relationships and colleagues. You need professional help. I'm trying to protect you and our unborn child. Reed's fingers were already moving frantically on his tablet, his tech expertise kicking into overdrive. Let me see that so-called evidence. Right now, I want to examine the digital forensics. That's privileged attorney work product, Vaughn said smoothly. But there was a flicker of concern in his eyes that told me he knew the evidence was fabricated. And that court order was signed by Judge Thomas Patterson, Declan said, scanning the document with his practiced lawyer's eye, his expression growing darker by the second. Who happens to be your fraternity brother from Harvard? Blake? Who played golf with you last month at the country club? Who owes you several significant favors from that zoning case controversy you consulted on? How remarkably convenient that he was available to sign an emergency psychiatric order at 9 p.m. on a Saturday night. Blake's expression didn't change, his mask firmly in place and professionally maintained. My personal connections don't invalidate a legitimate court order issued by a sitting judge with proper jurisdiction. Grace needs psychiatric evaluation. After tonight's very public breakdown, witnessed by hundreds of people, including several state senators, the mayor, and prominent business leaders, I think everyone can agree she's not currently capable of making rational decisions about her own health or our child's welfare. Public breakdown. The words hit like a slap across the face. He was already rewriting history, turning my assault into my instability, my victimization into my mental illness, making me the villain of my own trauma. One of the police officers, a young man who looked deeply uncomfortable with this entire situation, addressed me directly with genuine sympathy. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but we need you to comply with the court order. It's a mandatory 72-hour psychiatric evaluation hold. If you resist or fight, we're authorized to use reasonable force to ensure compliance. No, I said, panic rising in my chest like floodwater, making it hard to breathe properly. I'm not crazy. They're lying. This is retaliation. This is abuse of the legal and psychiatric systems. Nash moved immediately to my bedside, his hand finding mine, his voice low and urgent and focused. Grace, listen to me very carefully. We're going to fight this. We're going to destroy this fraudulent order. But right now, in this moment, you need to stay calm. Fighting physically will only make you look unstable and validate their narrative. For the baby's sake, for your own safety, you need to show them you are in control and rational. Exactly, Blake said, his voice dripping with a false concern that made me want to scream, playing perfectly to the police officers who held the real power in this moment. Your stress levels are medically dangerous. That's why you're bleeding, why you're having serious pregnancy complications. You need professional psychiatric help, and you need it immediately for everyone's safety. The room tilted sickeningly like I was on a carnival ride I couldn't escape. He was going to lock me away in a psychiatric facility, discredit me completely and permanently, paint me as an unstable woman having a breakdown. By the time I got out in 72 hours, he'd have crafted a perfect narrative, the paranoid, emotionally unstable wife who couldn't handle the pressures of being married to a successful CEO. He'd have custody arrangements in place, character witnesses lined up and rehearsed, a story so airtight that my truth would sound like delusion and mental illness. This was the plan all along, carefully constructed over months. The public humiliation at the gala was just step one, the opening move in a much larger game. Get me on video looking disheveled and distressed. Create hundreds of witnesses to my breakdown, then use the legal system to have me committed before I could recover or fight back effectively. Declan pulled Nash and Reed aside, and they spoke in urgent whispers I could barely hear. I caught fragments over the beeping of medical monitors and my own racing heartbeat. We need our own psychiatric expert here immediately to counter this. The laptop evidence is almost certainly fabricated. Reed, can you prove that definitively? Patterson's corrupt as hell, but unfortunately the order is technically legal under Massachusetts law. We need to move extremely fast before they transfer her to a facility we can't access. Blake's attorney addressed the police officers with smooth, practiced authority. Gentlemen, please prepare to escort Ms. Morrison to the psychiatric ward. We have prearranged accommodations with the facility here at Boston Memorial. I looked at Nash desperately, my last lifeline in a situation spiraling completely out of control. He moved closer, speaking quietly so only I could hear, his words fast and urgent and carefully chosen. Grace, I promise you on everything I have, on my family's name, we're going to prove this is completely false. We're going to destroy Blake and everyone helping him. But you need to go with them right now without fighting. Don't fight physically. Don't give them any ammunition or evidence to use against you. Show them you're rational, cooperative, completely in control of your faculties. Everything you say and do for the next 72 hours will be meticulously documented and used either for or against you in legal proceedings. Be the brilliant lawyer you are. Document everything you observe. Note every inconsistency. We'll get you out, I swear it. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life, sitting still and letting them prepare me for transfer to psychiatric custody, watching the Foster brothers face off against Blake and his attorney in a battle of wealth and influence I couldn't participate in. Seeing the calculated triumph in Blake's eyes as he realized he was winning this round decisively. As they helped me into a wheelchair, standard procedure for patient transfers, I heard Declan's voice, low and absolutely dangerous in its controlled calm. You just made a catastrophic mistake. Sutherland, my family doesn't forget betrayals. We don't forgive attacks on innocent people, and we sure as hell don't lose when we decide to fight. Blake laughed confidently, the sound dismissive and arrogant. Your family doesn't scare me. Foster, I have the law firmly on my side. I have a judge's signature on legal documents. I have documented evidence of mental instability. What do you have? Empty threats and family money. For now, Reed said quietly, his fingers still moving across his tablet with focused intensity. You have the law on your side, but I wonder how the law will feel when they see what I'm currently downloading from your company's supposedly secure servers. Amazing what you can find when you actually know where to look and how systems really work. The last thing I saw before they wheeled me toward the psychiatric ward was Nash Foster pulling out his phone, already making calls with grim determination, his expression promising retribution. 72 hours. I had 72 hours to prove I wasn't crazy while trapped in a place specifically designed to make everyone seem unstable and irrational. 72 hours before Blake's carefully crafted narrative became permanent, carved in legal stone and medical records. But what Blake didn't know, what he couldn't possibly anticipate in his arrogance, was that I'd spent my entire career fighting powerful men who thought they were completely untouchable. I'd taken down executives, politicians, corporate boards. I knew how to build devastating cases from almost nothing, how to find the weak points in armor that seemed impenetrable. He'd just made the fatal mistake of giving me 72 hours to prepare my counterattack. The psychiatric ward at Boston Memorial Hospital occupied the entire 7th floor, accessible only by special elevator with key card access. It smelled like industrial antiseptic, barely masking desperation and fear. They gave me hospital scrubs, took my belongings including my phone and wedding rings, and led me to a small room with a narrow bed, a plastic chair bolted to the floor, and a window that didn't open more than 2 inches. The door locked from the outside with a magnetic click that drove home my situation with crushing finality. I sat on the bed and forced myself to think like an attorney instead of a terrified pregnant woman. Blake had outmaneuvered me tonight, but he'd also revealed his strategy. This wasn't about protection, it was about silencing me before I could become a legal problem for Sutherland Pharma. A nurse came in around midnight, clipboard in hand. Middle-aged, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Ms. Morrison, I'm Nurse Linda Stevens. I'll be doing your intake evaluation. How are you feeling? Angry, I said honestly. Furious, but mentally stable. Can I ask you something? She paused. Go ahead. How many women in this ward are here because their powerful husbands filed emergency psychiatric orders to silence them? Her expression shifted subtly. I can't discuss other patients. I'm not asking for names. I'm a whistleblower attorney. I suspect I'm not the first pregnant woman whose wealthy husband weaponized psychiatric commitment. Nurse Stevens was quiet, then said carefully, You'd be surprised how common it is. Or maybe you wouldn't be. Who's the evaluating psychiatrist? Dr. Patricia Hammond. She's good, genuinely fair. She won't be swayed by money or connections. That was something, at least. The psychiatric evaluation happened the next morning. Dr. Hammond was exactly as described, sharp-eyed, professionally dressed, impossible to fool. She asked probing questions about my work, marriage, pregnancy, mental health. I answered calmly, like a deposition. Your husband claims you researched faking pregnancy complications. Can you explain that? I never researched that. Dr. Hammond, I'm a whistleblower attorney investigating pharmaceutical fraud. If those searches exist, they weren't mine. Check the digital forensics timestamps, location data. Any legitimate investigation will prove those searches didn't come from me. She made notes. Your husband claims you made threats. I confronted him about his affair. If he considers honest questions threatening, then yes, but I never threatened violence. I asked for truth about my own marriage. Tell me about last night. I walked her through it methodically. The torn dress, public divorce announcement, physical assault, facts only, no emotional language. How did that make you feel? Furious, betrayed, terrified for my baby. But Dr. Hammond, those are rational responses to being assaulted while 7 months pregnant, aren't they? Wouldn't absence of those emotions indicate a break from reality? She almost smiled. Yes, Ms. Morrison, those are appropriate responses. That afternoon during common room time, I met 3 other women at a card table, all with the same haunted look, the same story in different handwriting. My husband's a state senator, one said. I found embezzlement evidence. 2 days later, I was here. Mine's a real estate developer, another added. I discovered he was bribing building inspectors. When I threatened to report him, suddenly I was unstable. The third woman, barely 25, said quietly, my ex is a police captain. When I left with our daughter, he had me committed. I haven't seen her in 8 months. I looked at these intelligent women destroyed by corrupt men weaponizing the system. Something crystallized in my mind. What if we documented everything? I said. Built cases together. I'm a whistleblower attorney. This is what I do. We have 3 days. Let's use them to build something they can't ignore. You're serious, the senator's wife asked. Completely. They silenced us. Let's build evidence so compelling it can't be dismissed. You have stories, details. You just need someone who knows how to weaponize it legally. I do. For 2 days, we worked. I took notes, created timelines, organized evidence. These women had substantial proof they just hadn't known how to structure legal cases. During therapy sessions, we refined narratives. During meals, we corroborated details. On day 3, Dr. Hammond called me for final evaluation. Ms. Morrison, I'm clearing you for immediate release. You show no signs of psychiatric illness. You're rational, calm, articulate. Frankly, I believe your husband's order was deliberate abuse of the commitment system. Relief flooded through me, Bill. Thank you, doctor. However, I'm filing a formal complaint about what I've observed. You're not the only woman unjustly committed. Someone needs to investigate this pattern. I will, I promised. Absolutely. When I walked out, Nash Foster was waiting. His expression was grim. Grace, we need to talk. What Reed and I found about Sutherland Pharma, it's worse than you can imagine. Bigger than Blake's affair. This goes deep, and it's going to explode. Nash drove me to a safe house in Cambridge, a restored brownstone near Harvard. Declan and Reed were already there. The dining room transformed into a war room with laptops and evidence covering every surface. Sit down, Declan said without preamble. What we're about to show you will be difficult. I sat, hand protectively on my belly where my daughter moved. Reed pulled up spreadsheets on his laptop. I hacked Sutherland Pharma's systems. Grace, your husband's company has been knowingly selling contaminated prenatal vitamins for 18 months. The room spun. What Blake wouldn't, he makes me take those every day. The contamination started 18 months ago at their Newark plant. Reed continued. Quality control flagged it immediately. Blake was personally notified. He buried the reports and kept selling them. Nash laid out photographs, medical records, birth certificates, hospital reports. We've documented 42 cases of serious birth defects directly traceable to Sutherland vitamins, neural tube defects, heart abnormalities, 42 babies, Grace, 42 families destroyed because Blake prioritized profit. I couldn't breathe. I've been taking those vitamins since my 2nd trimester. I know, Nash said gently. That's why we had your doctor run additional tests. Your baby shows no signs of problems, but we're monitoring closely. Why would Blake do this? Declan pulled up financials. Money? Recalling the vitamins would cost $200 million. It would destroy the stock price before his CEO promotion. He would have lost millions personally. Sloane Pierce isn't just his lover, Reed added. She's director of crisis management. Her job is burying problems. She structured the cover-up. Nash leaned forward. Grace, when did you start asking questions about the company? I thought back. 3 months ago, I was working on a pharmaceutical fraud case, asked Blake technical questions about Sutherland's procedures. He got defensive. That's when the affair intensified, Nash said. They started planning insurance measures. The Gala humiliation wasn't random, Declan explained. It was strategic character assassination. They needed to destroy your credibility before you could become a whistleblower. I felt sick. They were going to blame me. If something happened to my baby, they'd say I was unstable. Exactly, Reed confirmed. We found draft press releases about Blake's heartbreak over his mentally ill wife's tragic loss. But we have everything now, Nash said. Financial records proving they knew. Internal emails showing cover-up. Quality control reports. Medical records. Enough to bury Blake and Sloane. Reed tapped his laptop. I also found something about Garrett Pierce, Sloane's brother and Sutherland's CFO. He's kept his own insurance files, including evidence implicating Sloane. I think he's planning to turn. Can we flip him, Mum? I asked. Already working on it, Declan confirmed. My lawyers offered immunity. If he testifies, he walks. Blake and Sloane face prosecution. Nash pulled out a folder. I've written the complete story. But Grace, if I publish, your life becomes a media circus. The scandal will dominate every cycle. Blake will fight back viciously. It will be brutal. I looked at the evidence, thinking about 42 babies. Publish it. Those families deserve justice. Those babies deserve compensation. Other women need to see powerful men don't always win. Publish everything. Nash nodded. There's one more thing. Sloane's already planting stories that you're unstable. Then we move faster. When does your story publish? Tonight at 9 p.m., simultaneously across 6 platforms. By morning, this will be everywhere. Nash published at 9, within 2 hours. The Sutherland scandal was trending everywhere. The headline screamed corporate crime. By morning, federal investigators opened an inquiry. The FBI raided Sutherland Pharma. Blake was arrested at his office, cameras capturing him in handcuffs. Sloane Pierce was arrested at her apartment. I watched from the safe house. Nash beside me. You did it, he said. You brought him down. But I felt hollow. It doesn't feel like winning. It will, Nash promised. When those families get justice, when those babies get medical care, when other women find courage, that's when it'll feel like victory. I wanted to believe him. For days, I did. Blake was in custody. The investigation was expanding. I was safe. Then, 3 weeks later, my water broke unexpectedly. 3 weeks early. The contractions started hard and fast. This baby was coming now. The contractions started with shocking, overwhelming intensity, doubling me over in the safe house living room where I'd been reviewing legal documents for the upcoming trial. One moment I was fine. The next I was gasping as pain radiated through my entire core like electricity. Nash was immediately at my side, supporting me, while Declan called an ambulance and Reed scrambled to arrange hospital security protocols. It's too early, I gasped between contractions that were already coming less than 5 minutes apart. She's not due for 3 more weeks. Something's wrong. Something must be wrong. Was early but not dangerous, Nash assured me, but I could see the worry in his eyes that contradicted his calm words. Babies born at 37 weeks do perfectly fine. You're going to be okay. She's going to be okay. We're prepared for this. The ambulance arrived within minutes, another advantage of the foster family's influence and resources. Paramedics loaded me onto a stretcher, checking vitals and asking rapid-fire questions about my contraction timing, my medical history, my previous complications. Nash climbed into the ambulance with me, despite protocol. His presence the only thing keeping me anchored as panic tried to overwhelm rational thought. At Boston Memorial Hospital, they rushed me directly to labor and delivery, bypassing the normal admission process. The foster family's security team had already arrived ahead of us, stationing themselves strategically outside the delivery floor, checking credentials of every doctor and nurse who approached my room. After everything that had happened, after Blake's elaborate attempts to destroy me, they weren't taking any chances with my safety or my baby's. But we should have been more paranoid. We should have checked everyone more carefully and thoroughly. The pain was intense and building exponentially, the baby coming faster than anyone expected or predicted. Too fast. Through the haze of contractions, I heard nurses talking urgently about emergency cesarean section, about complications from my earlier placental abruption that might affect delivery dangerously. Standard complications, they assured me repeatedly. Nothing to worry about unnecessarily. The attending physician arrived, pushing through the curtain with practiced confidence and authority. Dr. Owen Bradshaw, my regular obstetrician, the man who'd been managing my prenatal care for months. I should have felt relieved to see a familiar face during this crisis. Instead, something in his expression made my blood run cold with instant dread, something calculating behind his professional concern. Dr. Bradshaw, I managed between contractions that were stealing my breath. Something feels wrong. This is happening too fast. Something's not right. Everything's progressing normally for a first baby. Grace, he said smoothly, his voice professionally soothing in that particular way doctors use when they're not telling you everything. First babies can surprise you with their timing. We're going to take excellent care of you and this little one. Nash was in the waiting room just outside, separated by hospital policy and protocols. Labor and delivery only allowed immediate family beyond a certain point. And since Nash and I weren't married or legally related, they'd made him stay in the family waiting area. The Foster brothers were there too, their security team positioned throughout the floor. But they couldn't get past the locked doors without violating hospital regulations and causing problems. I was alone with Dr. Bradshaw and his hand-picked surgical team, and every instinct I'd honed over years of investigating fraud was screaming that something was terribly, dangerously wrong. The epidural took effect quickly, the anesthesiologist working with smooth efficiency. The lower half of my body went numb, that strange disconnected feeling that was both relief and vulnerability. They draped sterile surgical sheets, blocking my view of the procedure, prepared instruments with metallic clinks. Everything looked standard, normal, exactly like the C-section procedures I'd researched obsessively during my pregnancy. Then I heard Dr. Bradshaw speaking quietly to the surgical nurse, his voice pitched just low enough that he probably thought I couldn't hear through the medication haze. Prepare 4 units of blood for immediate transfusion. She's going to hemorrhage significantly. Have the crash cart positioned and ready for immediate use. How did he know that, with such certainty, the surgery hadn't even started yet? Why would he predict severe bleeding before making the first incision? Doctor. I tried to sit up, but the epidural and restraints kept me flat and helpless. What did you just say? Why would I hemorrhage? Just standard precautions, he said, but he wouldn't meet my eyes directly. We always prepare for potential complications with high-risk patients. They began the procedure. I felt pressure, tugging, the bizarre sensation of surgery happening to my body through layers of anesthetic. Then the most beautiful sound in the world, my daughter's first cry. Strong and indignant and absolutely perfect. She's beautiful and healthy, a nurse said warmly, showing me briefly, a tiny red-faced baby with a shock of dark hair, before whisking her away to the warming station to check vitals and clean her up. Overwhelming relief flooded through me like a wave. My daughter was alive, healthy, breathing, safe. Whatever else happened, she was here. Then the bleeding started. Alarms began beeping urgently and insistently. Blood pressure dropping rapidly. Someone called out with controlled panic. Significant hemorrhaging from the surgical site. Another voice confirmed urgently. Dr. Bradshaw's hands moved inside me, his actions deliberately hidden by the surgical drapes. I couldn't feel what he was doing through the numbness, but I could see his face clearly. He looked calm, too calm, focused but not surprised, like this was expected, planned, rehearsed. Uterine artery compromised, he announced to his team with clinical detachment, appears to be a surgical complication. Get me clamps immediately. Surgical complication. The words echoed in my mind, cutting through the medication fog. But his expression told me everything. This wasn't an accident or a complication. His face showed concentration, not surprise. He'd known this would happen because he was deliberately making it happen. Wait, I tried to say, but my voice was weak, already fading as blood loss made the room start to blur at the edges. You're doing this on purpose. You're causing the bleeding. Someone check his financials. Blake paid him. Someone stop him. She's delirious from blood loss and anesthesia. Dr. Bradshaw told his team smoothly, his voice taking on that particular tone medical professionals use to dismiss patient concerns. Increase the sedation. We need her unconscious for the repair work. No. I fought against the drowsiness, against the darkness creeping in from the periphery of my vision. He's on Blake's payroll. He's been feeding Blake information about my health for months. He's trying to kill me. Someone check his bank accounts. Someone stop him now. But nobody heard me clearly through my weakening voice. Or nobody believed the words of a woman losing blood, high on anesthesia, her voice barely above a whisper. The anesthesiologist increased the sedation as ordered, and darkness crept in faster, pulling me under despite my desperate attempts to stay conscious and aware. The last thing I heard was a tremendous crash, the delivery room doors slamming open with violence, alarms adding to alarms. Nash's voice, shouting with an urgency that cut through the medical chaos. Stop the surgery immediately. Federal agents are here with a warrant for Dr. Owen Bradshaw's arrest. Step away from the patient right now. The room erupted in confusion and shouting, people yelling over each other. Dr. Bradshaw backing away from the surgical table, his bloodied gloves raised. Through my rapidly fading consciousness, I heard Reed's voice, tight with barely controlled fury. We got him. Everything's recorded. The cameras I planted in this delivery room 3 days ago caught everything he did. Every deliberate cut, every caused complication. We have it all on video with timestamps. Cameras. Reed had planted hidden cameras because they'd suspected something exactly like this. Because the Foster brothers had learned to think like their enemies, to anticipate every possible attack. New hands took over the surgery immediately. A different surgeon, her voice urgent but professionally competent. I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell, vascular surgeon. I'm taking over this procedure immediately. Someone get me a full surgical team now. They worked quickly, efficiently, repairing the damage Dr. Bradshaw had deliberately caused, stopping the bleeding he'd initiated to make my death look like tragic surgical complications, saving my life while I drifted in and out of consciousness. The last coherent thought I had before the sedation pulled me completely under was please, please let my daughter be okay. Let her be safe. Let her live even if I don't. Then darkness absolute and complete. I woke up 2 days later in intensive care. Machines beeped around me, IVs in both arms. My body felt like it had been hit by a truck, every muscle aching. Grace, Nash's voice, rough from exhaustion. I turned my head slowly. He sat in an uncomfortable chair beside my bed, unshaven, eyes bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't slept since surgery. My baby, I whispered. Please tell me she's alive. His exhausted face broke into a genuine smile. She's absolutely perfect. Grace, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, healthy lungs, no complications. She's in the NICU for observation since she came early, but she's thriving. She's a fighter, just like her mother. Tears slid down my face. Can I see her soon? He promised, his hand finding mine. You nearly died on that table. You coded twice. Another few minutes and we would have lost you. The doctors said it was the closest call they've seen in years. Dr. Bradshaw, I said, the name bitter, is in federal custody. Nash confirmed. Reed's cameras captured everything. We have video evidence of deliberate surgical sabotage. Bradshaw received $200,000 from Blake 4 days before your delivery, wired through shell companies. He was hired to cause complications that would look like natural childbirth risks. My voice came out hollow. Blake tried to have me killed. He tried to kill me and his own daughter, and frame it as medical complications. Yes, Nash said, fury barely held in check. But he failed, and now he's facing first-degree attempted murder charges. The federal prosecutor is building an airtight case. Over the next few days, the full story emerged. Dr. Bradshaw had been on Blake's payroll for 7 months. receiving monthly payments plus the final bonus. He'd been feeding Blake information about my health, anything that could be weaponized. The plan had always been to eliminate me, make it look like tragic pregnancy complications. Blake would emerge as the grieving widower, gaining custody, positioned for sympathy right as the scandal broke. He'd planned to use my death to deflect from his crimes. Sloan Pierce had orchestrated everything: the public humiliation, the psychiatric commitment, the corrupt doctor ready to cause fatal complications. Every piece carefully positioned. "Where are they now?" I asked Nash. "Blake's held without bail at Fort Devens. Sloan's at MCI Framingham, also denied bail. Garrett Pierce took our immunity deal. His testimony will seal their convictions. And the families, the 42 babies. Class action lawsuit filed. Sutherland Pharma is bankrupt. The families will receive full compensation, lifetime medical care funding. It won't undo the harm, but it's something." A week later, they finally let me see my daughter. They wheeled me to the NICU. Nash walked beside me while Declan and Reed followed. My daughter was tiny in her incubator, but strong. When I touched the glass, her eyes opened, focusing on me. She knew I was her mother. "Have you chosen a name?" Nash asked gently. "Claire," I said. "Claire Morrison Foster, after my mother, and after the family who saved both our lives." Judith Foster came to visit that afternoon. She stood at the NICU window, looking at baby Claire. "She's beautiful." "Grace," Judith said softly. "She looks like your mother." I turned to face her. "You knew my mother well." "Claire Morrison worked for my husband's firm 33 years ago." Judith said, "She was brilliant. When she discovered financial irregularities, she reported them. The company retaliated viciously. They blacklisted her from every firm in Boston. She had to take jobs far below her skill level to support you." My throat tightened. "She died in a car accident 14 months after being fired." Judith continued, "The official report said weather-related, but I always wondered. The timing was suspicious. She'd been talking about going public with evidence." "You think someone killed my mother?" "I think powerful men protecting illegal profits are capable of terrible things," Judith said carefully. "I couldn't prove anything then or now, but I spent 30 years regretting that I didn't help Claire when I could have." She turned to face me. "When my sons told me what happened to you, when Nash mentioned your name, I realized who you were. You're Claire's daughter, and I realized I'd been given a second chance. I couldn't save your mother, but I could save you." I felt tears sliding down my face. "So this wasn't random kindness. This was personal." "Very personal," Judith confirmed. "Your mother tried to do the right thing, and the system destroyed her. I refused to let that happen to you. Your mother's courage echoed forward through time to protect her daughter decades later. That's her legacy. Grace, she didn't die for nothing." I looked at Nash. "You knew from the beginning." "I suspected," he admitted. "Your mother's case was one of the first whistleblower stories I investigated as a young journalist. I never got enough evidence to publish, but I never forgot her name. When I heard your name at that gala, I thought it might be coincidence. Then I looked at your face and saw Claire Morrison. I saw my chance to finally do right by her legacy." "So you weren't saving me," I said slowly. "You were repaying my mother." "We were doing both," Declan said quietly. "Repaying an old debt to Claire Morrison and saving a woman who deserved better. Those two things can both be true." Looking at baby Claire through the NICU glass, I felt something shift in Maud. My mother's sacrifice hadn't been forgotten. Her courage had created ripples that spread across decades, protecting her grandchild she'd never meet. "Thank you," I whispered, "for remembering her, for honoring her courage, for making sure her fight meant something." Judith squeezed my hand gently. "Some debts take a full generation to repay, but they're worth repaying, no matter how long it takes." 6 months later, autumn painted Boston in brilliant shades of red and gold. I stood in the newly renovated offices of Morrison Justice, the whistleblower protection law firm I'd founded using the settlement money from Sutherland Pharma and a substantial investment from the Foster Family Trust. The space was bright and welcoming, occupying an entire floor overlooking Boston Common, where fall leaves created a constantly shifting masterpiece outside floor-to-ceiling windows. On the walls, Framed photographs told stories of survival and justice. The three women I'd met in the psychiatric ward, all free now, their cases won, their lives reclaimed. Photographs of the 42 babies affected by Sutherland's contaminated vitamins, each one getting the medical care they deserved. News clippings about Blake's conviction and Sloane's guilty plea. Evidence that standing up to power, no matter how difficult, could actually change things. Claire sat in a specialized baby carrier on my desk, watching everything with serious blue eyes that reminded me constantly of my mother. She was healthy, thriving, already showing signs of the determination that ran in her bloodline. The terror of her premature birth and Blake's attempt to kill us both had faded into memory, replaced by the daily joy of watching her grow and discover the world. Nash walked in carrying 2 cups of expensive coffee and a folder thick with case files. Over the past 6 months, our partnership had evolved from grateful survivor and protective journalist into something much deeper, something real and earned, built slowly on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than trauma and crisis. Congressional hearings in 90 minutes, he said, setting down the coffee and checking his watch. Traffic's going to be terrible. We should leave soon. I looked at my prepared testimony, the statement I was about to deliver before the Senate Committee on Healthcare Fraud and Corporate Accountability. The Sutherland case had sparked nationwide investigations into pharmaceutical industry practices, uncovering a pattern of corner cutting and profit over safety that reached far beyond one company. My testimony would help shape new regulations, new protections, new accountability measures. I'm ready, I said with confidence I'd earned through surviving the unsurvivable. The Senate hearing room in Washington, D.C. was packed to capacity. Senators arranged behind their imposing bench, journalists filling the press section, pharmaceutical executives forced to sit and face their accusers publicly. Blake and Sloane would testify too, brought from their respective federal prisons to face the consequences of their actions in front of the nation. I walked to the witness table with my head high, Claire secure in a carrier against my chest because I refused to hide my motherhood or pretend it made me less capable. Nash sat in the audience directly behind me, moral support and partner. The Foster brothers sat in the gallery with Judith between them, my chosen family watching my back. Blake was led in wearing orange prison scrubs that stripped away all his manufactured power and prestige. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by incarceration and exposure. Our eyes met across the formal chamber. I felt nothing. No anger, no residual love. Just the cold satisfaction of justice finally, completely served. Senator Patricia Hendricks, chair of the committee, called the hearing to order with her gavel. Ms. Morrison, thank you for agreeing to testify today. We understand you've prepared an opening statement. I have, Senator, I replied clearly, my voice steady and strong. I began to speak about the contaminated vitamins, about 42 babies whose lives were forever changed by corporate greed, about the systematic cover-up that prioritized quarterly profits over human suffering. But mostly, I spoke about the women who'd been silenced by corrupt systems that weaponized psychiatry, medicine, and law against those who dared to speak truth. The system failed me and countless other women, I said, making eye contact with senators, with journalists, with everyone who needed to hear this. Powerful men weaponized laws that were designed to protect vulnerable people. They used medicine as a tool of control and abuse. They counted on silence and shame to keep us compliant and invisible. I paused, looking directly at Blake across the chamber. They were catastrophically wrong. The hearing lasted 4 intensive hours. Senators asked pointed questions. Pharmaceutical executives gave defensive answers. Medical experts testified about contamination effects. Legal scholars discussed gaps in current regulations. When it was finally over, Senator Hendricks announced immediate bipartisan legislative action, new protections for corporate whistleblowers, stricter pharmaceutical manufacturing oversight with surprise inspections, criminal penalties for executives who knowingly endanger public health, reforms to prevent abuse of psychiatric commitment procedures, real consequences with real teeth. Outside the Capitol building, reporters swarmed with questions and cameras. I'd learned over these months to handle media effectively, to use public attention as a tool rather than being victimized by it. Miss Morrison, what's next for Morrison Justice? One journalist called out. I looked at Nash, at Claire sleeping peacefully against my chest, at the life we were actively building from the ashes and destruction Blake had tried to create. We keep fighting, I said simply but firmly. Morrison Justice currently represents 18 new clients this month. Women who've been silenced, threatened, dismissed by systems that should protect them. We're building something that can't be torn down by powerful men and their enablers. We're building real, lasting justice. Another reporter pushed forward. What would you say to other women in similar situations? Women facing powerful opponents who seem untouchable. I thought carefully about the question, about the universal struggle we all face when systems fail us catastrophically, when people we trusted betray us completely, when the world tries systematically to make us small, silent, invisible. I'd say this, I began, choosing words carefully. They tried to humiliate me at a gala in front of everyone who mattered in Boston. They deliberately tore my dress, exposed my pregnant body, made me a public spectacle for their entertainment. They thought shame and embarrassment would break me permanently, would make me disappear quietly. Instead, it freed me to become who I was always meant to be. I held Claire closer, feeling her steady heartbeat against mine, the physical reminder of what I was fighting for. Some of us don't break when the world tries systematically to crush us. We build instead. We fight back strategically. We win ultimately. Not because we're special or extraordinary, but because we absolutely refuse to let cruelty and corruption have the final word in our stories. The reporters scribbled notes frantically. Cameras flashed, but I barely noticed anymore. Nash took my hand naturally, and together we walked down the Capitol steps into autumn sunshine. Behind us, justice served and accountability enforced. Ahead of us, a life worth living and work worth doing. Blake Sutherland received 25 years in federal prison for attempted murder, pharmaceutical fraud, conspiracy, and endangerment. With good behavior, he might be released when he's 68. Sloan Pierce received 20 years as an accomplice and co-conspirator. Dr. Owen Bradshaw lost his medical license permanently and faced 15 years for attempted murder and medical malpractice. The 42 families received full financial compensation and lifetime medical care funding for their affected children. Sutherland Pharma's liquidated assets totaled over $300 million in settlements. Real money for real harm, not just token gestures. Morrison Justice grew into one of the most respected whistleblower protection firms in the country, with satellite offices in New York and Washington, D.C. We won case after case, protecting people who dared to speak truth to power, building precedent that made it harder for future Blakes to destroy future Graces. Nash and I got married quietly 18 months later in a small ceremony at the Cambridge Safe House where this chapter of our story began. No grand gala, no public spectacle, just chosen family and genuine love. The Foster brothers became Claire's beloved uncles in every way that truly mattered, showering her with attention and terrible spoiling. Sometimes justice takes time to arrive. Sometimes it requires powerful allies with resources and determination. Sometimes you need billionaire brothers and investigative journalists to make corrupt people finally pay for their crimes. But always, always, it requires one person willing to stand up and say firmly, enough, no more. This stops now. I was that person for my daughter, for my mother's memory, for every woman who comes after me. And if you're reading this story, facing your own betrayal or humiliation, or moment where everything falls apart spectacularly, remember you can be that person too. You have that strength inside you, even when you can't feel it. The dress they tore became armor. The shame they weaponized became strength. The trap they meticulously set became the cage that ultimately held them. They thought they could destroy me completely at a gala night. Instead, they freed me to become exactly who I was always meant to be. A fighter, a mother, a woman who refuses categorically to be silenced. Some stories end with revenge. This one ends with something infinitely better. A life lived fully and authentically. Justice served completely and publicly. And a daughter who'll grow up knowing her mother never, ever backed down. That's how you make them pay. Not with matching cruelty, but with unwavering courage. Not with violence, but with persistent voice. You survive what seems unsurvivable. You build what seems unbuildable. You win what seems unwinnable. And you never, ever let them make you small again. The end.